I couldn't see, like it was all black, and I didn't know what was going on. I was just kind of throwing myself around.
A terrifying experience, and just as frightening for his family to witness. Coming up today on All Things Heart, the discovery by cardiologists here at the health system that saved more than one life in a Kansas teenager's family.
From the University of Kansas Health System.
I am amazed. The team here is great.
I came on a Tuesday, and then by Saturday I had a heart in me.
I have never seen a group of people work together so good as this team of heart specialists. I mean, it's just unreal.
Stand by to set up show.
And the Dolph C. Simons Jr. Family Broadcast Studio.
Roll it.
Always makes you feel like you're the most important patient on the planet.
I felt heard, and that was really big.
This is All Things Heart.
Good morning to you. It's Thursday, February 16th. I'm Alexis Del Cid. Welcome back to All Things Heart. Here's what we're talking about today. Fainting and seizures, two symptoms of something called long QT syndrome, which if untreated can be fatal. So what is long QT? How is it discovered? And what can happen to your heart if you have it? Plus,
just dance like we used to do.
Singing from the heart, her music is featured in several hit shows, and the young woman behind this incredible voice and video happens to have a very close tie to one of our doctors here at the health system. I'll give you a hint. The doctor's sitting about 5 feet from me. We'll get to that in a minute. And as always, we love it when you send us your questions and comments. Make sure you send them to us on YouTube, Facebook, or to our All Things Heart email. You can find the links right there on your screen. Now to the show. Let's face it, nobody likes the sound of their own alarm clock. It's pretty brutal, right? But for Kyle Steinmiller, when he was 16, the sound of his alarm triggered a frightening reaction that he's about to describe to you. Turns out it was a symptom of a rhythm disorder called long QT syndrome. And if untreated, it can be deadly. In fact, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute finds that 1 out of every 10 people, for the very first symptom of long QT, it's cardiac arrest. The heart simply stops beating.
Tell me how you've been otherwise. Chest pains, trouble breathing.
I'm feeling great.
Great is how you'd expect a 24-year-old guy in great shape to feel. But for Kyle Steinmiller, the road got rocky when he was just 16, his junior year of high school in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Something was happening with his heart, and it was brutal.
The times that I would have my episodes was actually set off by my alarm clock in the morning.
For most of us, alarm clocks are jarring, but for Kyle, it was more than that. His morning alarm clock would kickstart a wild pounding of his heart. He would later learn this was happening.
My heartbeat was around 300 beats per minute or so. Because of that, it doesn't really pump the blood at all. It just kind of quivers, kind of almost like a vibrating of sorts.
There's a name for it, long QT syndrome, and if untreated, it can be deadly. But at the time, Kyle and his family had no idea. It took one more really frightening episode after that morning alarm clock that sent Kyle to the ER.
I couldn't see, like it was all black, and I didn't know what was going on. I was just kind of throwing myself around.
His mom would later say it looked like he was convulsing and thrashing around in his bed. It would also be the catalyst for Kyle and his family to finally get answers from a cardiologist at the University of Kansas Health System with a fancy-sounding title, Clinical Cardiac Electrophysiologist.
She's the kind of doctor where other doctors are going to ask her the questions, not the other way around.
Enter Dr. Rhea Pimentel.
We all knew we could trust her 100%.
Little did Kyle and his family know Dr. Pimentel would not only diagnose and save Kyle's life, but she would also discover something incredibly surprising. Kyle wasn't the only one with this potentially deadly syndrome. There were 2 other family members, very dear to Kyle, who also happened to be living with a ticking time bomb inside their chests.
We are so pleased to have Kyle joining us today, along with his cardiologist and electrophysiologist, Dr. Rhea Pimentel. Thank you for being here. I know you're super busy. We're getting you between procedures every time we have you on, so thank you. Kyle, let's start with you. It's been more than 5 years since your initial diagnosis. How are you feeling today?
Feeling great, pretty normal, so just like every day.
That's what we love to hear. Just like every day, she got you back to your regular self. So, doctor, who else in the family had long QT?
After we diagnosed Kyle, we kind of went backwards because it's typically a genetic disorder, and we found that his mother who also had the same disorder and the same EKG findings. And then after that, we realized that his brother did too.
So. Oh my gosh. What's it like seeing the story about you, watching it now, Kyle?
Well, it can only make me smile since everything turned out all right. So it's nice being on the positive end of the story.
What would have happened if Kyle and his mom and his brother hadn't been diagnosed and treated, Dr. Pimentel?
I mean, we'll never know. I think, you know, for Kyle, these episodes were certainly concerning, and then he had one really bad episode that I think you're going to talk about later, that we actually had a monitor on him and showed exactly what was happening with his heart. And so then when I realized that the other family members had it, we also tried to monitor them more closely. And then approximately, I don't know, about a year later, we realized that his brother was doing the exact same thing, trying to die on us, and we were able to
when the alarm was going off in his brother's?
I don't remember, actually.
Okay.
I don't think it was an alarm thing, but he definitely had the same rhythm come up, and it was just because we had a monitor in him at the time that we were able to pick it up and intervene and put a defibrillator in him.
So what is it about an alarm clock that triggers this reaction? Like, what was it the sound, or was it the jarring, just how your body is so jarred by the sound of your alarm?
That's really interesting. It's the adrenaline surge. It changes from a just a very basic science standpoint. It makes certain ion channels in the heart open up, and it causes the heart rhythm to jump up. And in his vulnerable heart with this long QT, it caused really bad rhythms.
And so, Kyle, do you have any memory of what was happening when you were thrashing around, or is it just your mom telling you after the fact that she was watching it happen?
No, unfortunately, I remember every second of it, so it was a very scary time.
So can you describe it again? So everything, your alarm goes off, and then everything just goes black. You open your eyes and it goes black?
Yep, it took about a second or so for it to kick in, but then once it did, you get the worst kind of sick to your stomach feeling, you get the adrenaline rushing, and then there's no blood pumping really in your body, so you kind of start to faint, pass out, and all sorts of stuff that were going on.
When he talks about thrashing around, is that a seizure?
Yes.
So he was having
probably
seizures.
due to lack of blood to the brain.
Wow. So you diagnose it. This was a long road for him to get diagnosed and finally reach you, thank goodness. How do you treat it? How did you treat Kyle?
So most of long QT you treat, at least initially, with medication. So I think we put him on a low dose of a beta blocker medication, which can sort of help to sort of decrease that extra adrenaline response that you see. But then Kyle had another episode despite being on the medications, which then led to the defibrillator implantation.
And you've talked about being able to track the other family members. Did they also have defibrillators implanted into them?
They did not. So it's an interesting story, actually. Kyle came in on I think it was a Friday, Kyle, when you got sent in. I actually happened to be on call over the weekend. It was this weird story about a kid thrashing around. I think your mother told me that you had actually pushed furniture over. You were thrashing around so much, and we had no idea what was going on. All of, our heart testing was initially normal, but I did send off genetic testing at the time to see if there was a genetic abnormality that could be associated with rhythm issues. And then as part of our evaluation, I also said, hey, maybe we implant a loop recorder, or an implantable loop recorder underneath his skin, so we could monitor all of his heartbeats, even when he was out and doing things, because Kyle was in high school at the time, and I think a pretty decent track star, and really wanted to continue with his track season, and so that's how we ended up doing it. So when his genetic testing came back and there was long QT, Then we started testing the other family members, and we found that his brother and his mother also had it at about the same time. And then when Kyle got his defibrillator put in, we decided to put the monitor in the mother and the brother too, just so we could watch them more carefully.
And then that's when you saw things that were just as alarming. Did they have the same thing Kyle has exactly?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Wow. So I was talking to Kyle, I was talking to your mom on the phone yesterday, and first of all, she's the sweetest woman. Second of all, Dr. Pimentel, she said to me, I think her words were, thank God she was on call, because she says you saved her boy's life. And then that's when she got real emotional on the phone, because it's got to be emotional for a mom to realize both her sons have this and she has it. But she directly credits you for saving them.
She's a wonderful woman.
It was a really neat conversation. So Kyle, had you noticed any symptoms before the alarm clock was triggering things? Like you were a track star, you were very active in high school. Anything else before these episodes?
The only thing the only symptom I had before was, every now and then if I stood up too fast, I'd start to feel faint. And then I think one time I did actually faint fully. That was the only other symptom I ever had, and that might not even necessarily be indicative of long QT. So it was just kind of it was just the actual episodes themselves were the ones that were the indicator.
We have some pictures that Dr. Pimentel, you shared with us of Kyle's EKG strips. So if you could talk us through what we're seeing here, because for those of us without a medical degree, it just looks like scratches on a piece of paper. But for you, you saw some pretty remarkable things. So what are we seeing here?
So this is the monitor strip from that implantable loop recorder that Kyle had when he had his big event. And so the top line is basically normal rhythm. He's doing something. I can't see what the heart rate is, but it's pretty normal. And then below is when he goes into his fast heart rhythm, and that's called ventricular tachycardia. Specifically polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. Long QT is associated with that pattern where it's called torsade de points. It's a French name, but it means twisting around points. So you can kind of see that the amplitude of the waves kind of go up and go down and go up and go down, and that's very pathognomonic for long QT. And that is a rhythm that does not produce any blood flow to any organ, the head, the heart, or anything.
Wow.
And so if you're in it long enough, you will pass.
So is that when Kyle said his heart was quivering?
Quivering probably, and that's probably when he was having his seizure, when he was thrashing around.
That was my next question, is what do you think he was doing? What Kyle was doing when these were registering?
Passed out or thrashing around, and clearly not getting enough blood to his brain. In this particular case, it continues on. Yeah. I think this whole episode was about 4 minutes or so. And then magically, by the grace of God, it all just stops.
Weird.
So you can see that at the very bottom line, it just all of a sudden stops on its own.
And is that normal to stop on its own?
It is actually pretty normal. So the body gives you many clues that this is happening, and for Kyle, this was happening every time his alarm went off. Probably he would do that, and then his body would figure out a way to get out of it. The worry is that one of these times he wouldn't get out of it, and then he would die.
God forbid. Kyle, do you have limitations now? You said you're back to normal, back to your life. Anything you can't do?
There's very few things I can't do. I'm supposed to stay away from things like that'll get my adrenaline going. So things like scary movies, that kind of stuff, I kind of shy away from, even though I didn't really like them to begin with. I also can't go on things like roller coasters. Part of that's because of the adrenaline rush, and part of that is because of the actual device itself. I can't take big hits kind of stuff. I got to be more gentle with my body. So contact sports are mostly out of the question, even though I still play soccer every now and then. I don't know if Dr. Pimentel knew that or not. But
what would you say? Hold on, time out.
Just don't get hit.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's mainly.
So no more football.
Yeah, so it's mainly contact type stuff that I have to stay away from, and even hanging out with my friends. My friends had to get used to being more gentle with me, not it's pretty common for guys to just kind of walk up to each other and you know, hit each other on the back or whatever, saying hi, and
Yep.
they remembered to start to not do that. But more or less, my life is pretty much the same. You know,
Were you
I gotta
able
be
to continue
careful
with track?
I had to stop in the middle of the season. We were still working things out, and it wasn't until the season was pretty much over that I actually was in the hospital getting the implants done. So the season, it was just kind of the season just kind of ended naturally. I got about midway through it before we made a decision to stop. But my life is more or less normal. I got to worry about things like metal detectors and that kind of stuff, but other than that,
What happens if you go through a metal detector?
pretty much nothing. But there's always a risk of it interfering with the device itself. Either the device will turn off as like a self-protection feature, so I won't have, for that brief amount of time, I won't have the protections of the device, or it could lead to something worse, like it accidentally discharging. But fortunately, none of that has ever happened. And fortunately, technology is catching up. There's a lot of things like metal detectors that you're allowed to go through with pacemakers and devices like that. So
We have a QR code up on the screen right now, and I want to tell our viewers you can scan it. It'll take you to a health system link, and that will help you learn more about heart rhythm disorders. This QR code will be up throughout today's program. Dr. Pimentel, I have a question. Is long QT always genetic?
That's a really good question, actually. It is probably mostly genetic. There are some isolated cases of what we call long QT just secondary to drugs. So we'll have patients who don't have an identified genetic mutation, but their QT interval is long and they act like a familial long QT. So probably in those cases, we just haven't found the gene that's causing the problem, as opposed to in Kyle's family.
And Kyle, what's it like for this scary situation for you, having helped, possibly been the only reason this was detected in your mom and your brother? That must be surreal.
I was glad to be the guinea pig. So I'm very happy that they are safe for now because of that. So everything worked out pretty much all right in the end.
Well, your mom's pretty relieved that you and your brother are safe. I want to go to some questions from our viewers. We've been getting some emailed to us. Sadie wants to know if it's possible to have a mild form of long QT, doctor.
So long QT, so just as a backup, the QT interval is actually a measurement on the EKG. It's the time from when the bottom chamber squeezes to the time when it relaxes. And so the normal measurement is 440 milliseconds. I think Kyle's was like 530 or something. It is quite long. You can have a QT interval that's mildly prolonged.
Okay.
But you can't really have, you either have long QT or you don't have long QT.
Okay, you just answered one of the other questions we have coming up, which is what does long QT stand for? So basically, tell me if I get this in layman's terms, QT is the interval of beats.
Yeah, it's the time from the beginning of the bottom chamber squeezing electrically to the time that the bottom chamber relaxes.
So if that takes a longer time, you have long QT?
Yes. So if it takes a long time, it makes you more predisposed to these rhythms that can go super fast and decrease blood flow to the head.
Roger, one of our viewers, has another question about the genetics part. He wants to know if there's anything that you can do to prevent passing this on to your children, like if Kyle or his brother have kids, anything they can do to prevent that from being passed on to them?
Unfortunately not. Your genes are your genes. In this particular case, it's an autosomal dominant genetic mutation, so the children have an approximately 50% chance of getting the same abnormal gene.
And so at what age should a child, if you know you have a parent that has this is a question I have, at what age should you get your child tested for it?
You can get your child tested at any age. A lot of times, I see this play out when the kids want to do contact sports or things like that. You know, is it safe for them to go out and play if they might have this genetic disorder? I know other parents try and wait a little bit. There are some issues with insurance and things like that. There are some laws that prevent bias with insurance. Like if you have a child that has a positive genetic mutation, they may not be as insurance companies may not be as willing to actually cover them, obviously, as opposed to if you don't know. Most kids get tested like in the kind of late elementary school.
Is a test a blood test?
It's actually a saliva test.
Okay, so it's a quick saliva. It's a shame that insurance has to come into play. I know you can't talk on that, but just as a mom, that seems frustrating. So a quick saliva test can tell you if your child has this. Troy has a question. Troy writes, can you ask Kyle if he was able to keep running the rest of his high school career? You took a break during all this. Were you able to pick it up again and continue running through college and high school?
Yep, so I'm able to exercise normally, and there's very few restrictions I have in terms of cardio, you know, running, cycling, that kind of stuff. I don't want to push myself too hard. I don't want to get my heart rate up too fast. In fact, I think one time we had to kind of tweak my device's settings because I was exercising and my heart was normally just beating higher and reaching a threshold where the device was getting concerned, and so we had to kind of tweak some things. But for cardio, it's pretty normal lifestyle that I can live. Weightlifting is an issue, and that's primarily because of the device itself, not because of the heart issue. But I also don't want to get my blood pressure too high as well, which would be a result from lifting weights.
Got it. Cynthia has a question. She wants to know, and Kyle, if you don't know this, I'll ask Dr. Pimentel, what was your heart rate when you were having the symptoms? Do you know the answer to that?
I believe it was in excess of 300 beats per minute. Dr. Pimentel might be able to speak better to that, but at that point, it's not really beating.
Right.
The quivering.
The quivering. Yeah, I was looking at your rhythm strips, the ones that we showed earlier, and they looked like about 450, 480.
Jeez. What should it be?
Normal heart rate is between 60 and 100.
And his was at 450 during these?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. This is a question from Brad. Brad wants to know if a smartwatch can detect long QT.
Not really, because again, it's a measurement. Okay. So, I mean, I guess you could conceivably record a single lead EKG. Some of the smartwatches can do that, print it out, and then measure it. But that's pretty hard to do. That would require a lot of work.
Wow. I want to bring Kyle back in for this because I would love some final thoughts from you for all of our viewers. This was really important for your mom, she said, for you to share this story, and I know that you were super bold about sharing what happened to you. I also, actually, before we get there, you said something great about Dr. Pimentel. You said she's the kind of doctor you want when you're in any kind of crisis because she's the doctor that other doctors will ask for advice.
Yep, I found she's an expert in the field, and so I'm very confident with anything that she tells me, and I mean, I've got 100% trust in her and the faculty and staff at KU Med as a whole. I would go back in a heartbeat if I had to. No pun intended.
No pun intended. The compliments don't get much better than that for the health system or for you personally, Dr. Pimentel.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's pretty special. To our viewers, Kyle, would you have anything you would want to pass along to anyone watching?
If you ever feel anything weird in your body, whether or not it's related to your heart or anything else, always better be safe than sorry. Then go check it out. It's money can always be a factor, but but there's always, something worse that could be at play as well. So
around the corner. Dr. Pimentel, what about you?
You know, these are all these great feel-good stories when you're able to figure out what's wrong with the patient as well as help the families. You know, I will say that when Kyle presented, what was it, 5 years ago now, he was really an enigma, and it wasn't just me. You know, there were a bunch of people that were kind of hemming and hawing over his rhythm strips, well, initially, and his EKGs and his history, and you know, I'm glad, Kyle, you think that I'm the one that people ask for advice, because I was asking a lot of people about advice about you when we first diagnosed you. So it takes a village, and it's one of the things that I love so much about working in an academic medical center. There's so many great minds, and you know, the ability to just pick up a phone and say, what do you think, can you take a look at this, is a great thing. So
well, this has been a super interesting conversation, and we are not done yet. We have one more thing to show our viewers, because we love bringing you this next segment. It is called
Behind the Mask.
Behind the Mask, where we give a look behind the curtain at what our healthcare workers are like on a personal level. And we know, Dr. Pimentel, you love your daughters, you enjoy going on ventures with the family with them. However, it turns out Dr. Pimentel's daughters are also incredibly smart and talented. Is anyone surprised at that? I don't think so. But let's just start with a music video. This is so cool. Who are we watching here?
These are my two daughters, Emmy and Jordan. This is when they were in their kind of 14, 15 years old. They made a music video.
Yeah, it's really good. This was the first of many that your daughter Jo has made, right?
Yes, my younger daughter writes and produces music, and so this was one of her original songs that they had fun with.
Her songs are featured in Hulu shows, the CW's Batman, and the podcast Don't Tell My Mother. I mean, this is a pretty big deal. She's very accomplished, including your other daughter, who was reluctantly in this video, right?
She's very reluctantly in this video.
She has her own set of skills. Let's talk about Emmy. She has her own set of talents. Let's start with the tennis, because it turns out she's a tennis superstar and she's very smart.
Yes.
Well, let's go here. What are we looking at?
So this was one of the state championships. While she was a high school student, she played varsity tennis for 4 years. They won state 3 of those years. I believe this is the last year, because it was the only one I had. So, and they came in as runner-up. So very proud of her and her commitment to athletics and her ability to also be a real scholar as well as an athlete.
And I want to talk to you about that, because I've heard many times that if you're a student athlete, you tend to have better grades. And you showed me a picture of her in a graduation robe with lots of accoutrements, which means you're very smart when you have those things hanging over you. Tell me about her academic career.
It's amazing. She was cum laude. She was the speaker for her. That's the picture I showed you. She's the speaker for her graduating class ceremony.
And where'd she graduate from?
Blue Valley North.
Okay.
And she's currently at Boston College and is hoping to pursue a career somewhere in social healthcare disparities. She works a lot with the Women's Center in Boston, so she loves that stuff.
You must be so proud.
Very proud
of your daughters. That's pretty amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
And Kyle, thank you. We are so glad you are doing well. Thank you for sharing your journey. And we want to give a big thank you to our viewers for joining the conversation today. Coming up next week on All Things Heart.
There's no way to say thank you. How do you say thank you for receiving a donor's heart?
An epic health journey, all leading up to this moment, and talk about an intense journey: cancer, life-changing surgery, and then a heart transplant. The multiple battles this woman faced before receiving the gift of life. That is coming up next Thursday at 10 a.m. And this morning we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to leave you today with more music from the accomplished musician Jo McKenzie. This is her song titled Tourist. You can find her music on Spotify and iTunes. Thanks for watching.
The man on the bus, he's from Kansas. I wonder how his plans led him to this. Said he found the photo map in his pocket. We bought one too. I'm in the veins of the city. Got caught up in its bloodstream as I boarded a taxi. And I finally knew everyone's a tourist here. I grasping.